That Tuesday afternoon in March, the betrayal didn't just rob me of my retirement. It excavated something I'd spent 28 years carefully building alongside a man I'd once mentored like a younger brother. I stood near the catering table at the Pearl District Conference Center here in Portland, watching 200 people toast Dr. David Brennan as if he'd single-handedly pioneered the Mitchell and Brennan internal medicine practice from nothing. The champagne glasses clinked. The jazz trio played something smooth. The ice sculpture of our clinic's logo, a pair of intertwined stethoscopes, slowly melted under the warm March sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I remember thinking how appropriate that image was. Everything solid eventually dissolves. David stood at the microphone in his tailored Brioni suit, the charcoal one that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. He was 43 minutes into his speech about our journey. I'd been counting, not because I enjoyed tallying my own erasure, but because counting was the only thing preventing me from walking out into the Portland rain and never coming back. And I want to express my deepest gratitude to everyone who made this transition possible, David said, his voice carrying that practiced warmth he'd perfected over years of patient consultations. Our incredible staff, our loyal patients, and of course, the vision that brought Mitchell and Brennan from a dream to Portland's most trusted internal medicine practice. The vision. His vision, apparently. No mention of two doctors who'd met in a cramped hospital break room in 1997, both exhausted from back-to-back shifts at Providence Portland Medical Center. Both of us dreaming of something more than the assembly line medicine we were practicing. No mention of the countless nights we spent at the Stumptown Coffee on Division Street, sketching out business plans on napkins until the baristas started cleaning up around us. No mention of my wife, Ellen, selling her grandmother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing she'd inherited, so we could make our first month's malpractice insurance payment. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. My hip ached, the one I'd been putting off replacing because the practice had been too busy. 28 years of 12-hour days, of being on call every third night, of carrying the clinic through lean years and lawsuits, and the recession of 2008 had taken their toll on this 63-year-old body. David looked like he'd just stepped off a yacht. He'd stopped taking urgent calls 5 years ago, said his time was better spent on strategic partnerships and community outreach, which apparently meant golf at Pumpkin Ridge and wine tastings in Willamette Valley. The applause erupted as David finally concluded. I watched him step away from the podium, and that's when Jennifer Chen, our practice manager for the past decade, approached him carrying a wooden presentation box. "David," she said, her voice projecting just enough for the microphone to catch. "The entire staff wanted to give you something to commemorate your leadership and vision." He opened it with the kind of theatrical slowness that comes naturally to people who love being watched. Even from 15 feet away, I could see what was inside. A custom medical sculpture, gold and platinum, depicting the rod of Asclepius, intertwined with Pacific Northwest imagery, mountains, trees, rivers. Someone near me whispered, "Custom, made by that artist in Seattle, probably cost over $100,000. The crowd gasped appreciatively. David lifted it from the box, and the metal caught the light, throwing golden reflections across the ceiling. People applauded. Someone shouted, "Well deserved!" David hugged Jennifer. He hugged Dr. Peterson from radiology. He posed for photos with the sculpture, turning it this way and that, making sure every angle was captured. Then Jennifer walked toward me. I straightened up, adjusting my tie, the same tie I'd worn to my daughter's college graduation 8 years ago, because I didn't see the point in buying new ones. Something small and desperate flickered in my chest. 28 years. Surely there would be acknowledgement. Surely someone remembered that there were 2 names on the practice charter. 2 doctors who'd built this from an empty office space on Burnside Street. "Thomas," Jennifer said, and I heard something in her voice I couldn't quite place. Embarrassment, maybe. Obligation. She handed me an envelope. Not a box. Not even a card in a proper holder. Just a standard white envelope you could buy at Walgreens for $3 a pack. I opened it standing there next to the quinoa salad and the artisanal cheese display, with the sound of David's laughter floating across the room like smoke. Inside was an Amazon gift card. $40. Enough for maybe a couple of books if I found them on sale. There was a note, too, printed on plain printer paper. Thanks for holding down the fort all these years. Best wishes in retirement. The Mitchell and Brennan team. Holding down the fort. I had spent 28 years building this practice. I had personally managed the care of over 6,000 patients. I had negotiated the contracts that brought us into the Providence network, the deal that tripled our revenue. I had worked through pneumonia, through my father's cancer, through the night my daughter called, crying from college because she'd been in a car accident, and I'd talked her through it from the hospital parking lot between seeing patients. I had brought David Brennan into this practice when he was a green resident with more debt than sense, taught him how to actually listen to patients, how to build trust, how to run a practice that wasn't just about billing codes and throughput. And they thanked me for holding down the fort. I looked up. Across the room, David caught my eye. He raised his champagne glass toward me, that $100,000 sculpture gleaming on the table beside him. He smiled, not apologetically, not gratefully. He smiled the way a chess player smiles, when they've already won, and they're just waiting for you to realize it. I nodded back, set the gift card on the table next to the gluten-free crackers, and walked out of the Pearl District Conference Center at exactly 3:47 inches the afternoon, while 200 people celebrated a man who had spent the last decade systematically erasing me from the story of my own life. The March rain hit my face as I stepped onto Northwest 11th Avenue. Portland in early spring, the cherry blossoms just starting to bloom despite the drizzle, the food trucks lining up for dinner service, the streetcar rumbling past. Everyone living their normal lives while mine quietly shattered like glass. I didn't drive home immediately. I couldn't face Ellen yet. She'd been so proud this morning, had pressed my suit, had kissed me goodbye saying how much I deserved this celebration after all the years of sacrifice. How could I tell her that her husband, the co-founder of one of Portland's most respected internal medicine practices, had been reduced to a $40 gift card and a generic thank you note? Instead, I drove to Stumptown Coffee on Division Street, the same location where David and I used to meet in those early years, though it had been renovated twice since then. I sat in a booth with a coffee I bought with my own debit card, not the gift card, never the gift card, and stared at the rain streaking down the windows. That's when my phone buzzed. An email from Richard Walsh, our healthcare attorney. Subject line, privileged practice sale final documents. I opened it. The email had been sent to David. I was CC'd, presumably by accident. Richard's assistant probably auto-filled my name when typing David's. Richard had written, David, as discussed, here are the final sale documents with the equity distribution we agreed upon. The buyer, Pacific Northwest Medical Group, is comfortable with the 12% payout to Dr. Mitchell given his reduced clinical involvement in recent years and his upcoming retirement. The $8 2M purchase price reflects the practice valuation we discussed. Let me know if you want to move forward with the April 15th closing. The earnest money is already in escrow. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. Then I sat there in that coffee shop as the baristas made drinks and customers came and went, and the rain turned heavier against the windows. And I read it 7 more times. David was selling our practice, the practice we'd built together from nothing, and he was giving me 12% of $8.2 million. I pulled out my phone's calculator with shaking fingers. 12% of $8.2 million, $984,000. That sounded like real money to most people. That would sound like a generous retirement to anyone who didn't know the full story. But I owned 50% of Mitchell and Brennan Internal Medicine. According to our partnership agreement, signed in 1997 at a lawyer's office that had since been turned into a Thai restaurant, we were equal partners, 50-50 down the middle. We'd shaken hands on it. We'd signed it in front of a notary. We'd toasted it with cheap champagne we couldn't really afford. 50% of $8.2 million was $4.1 million. David Brennan was stealing $3.116 million from me. And he'd just made sure I knew exactly how disposable he considered me, standing there with his $100,000 sculpture while I held a $40 gift card like some kind of office intern being let go after a summer job. I sat in that Stumptown coffee until they dimmed the lights for closing. The staff wiped down tables around me. I didn't move. I just kept staring at that email, watching the numbers blur and refocus, thinking about 28 years of my life being reduced to 12% and a thank you note about holding down the fort. Finally, at 10:30, I drove home through the empty Portland streets. Ellen was asleep in bed, her book still open on her chest. I didn't wake her. Instead, I went to my study, the small converted bedroom that still smelled faintly of the antiseptic hand soap I could never quite wash off, no matter how many times I showered and I pulled out the filing cabinet I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the original documents, the partnership agreement, the incorporation papers, the lease for our first office, bank statements from those early years when we survived on credit cards and hope, patient logs showing who brought in whom, and there, in a folder I'd almost forgotten about, was something David didn't know I still had. In 2003, when we were expanding to a second location, we needed a building. The practice couldn't secure financing fast enough, banks were still skittish after the dot-com crash, and healthcare lending was tight, so I bought the building myself. A 2-story medical office building in the Hawthorne district. Perfect location, 4,800 square feet. I took out a loan against my house. Ellen cried when I told her. But she signed the papers anyway, because that's what you do when you believe in something. The practice used that building for 22 years. We saw patients there. We built our reputation there. Every major expansion we did, every new physician we brought on, they all worked out of that building at some point. But legally, officially, on the deed, the building belonged to Thomas Alexander Mitchell, private citizen. Not Mitchell and Brennan Internal Medicine. The practice paid me rent, a modest amount that barely covered my mortgage and property taxes. David had suggested at the time that we keep it separate for tax purposes and liability protection. I'd trusted him. He was like a younger brother to me. Why wouldn't I trust him? Now, sitting in my study at 11 at night, I finally understood. When you sell a medical practice, you sell its assets, patient files, equipment, contracts, goodwill, but the building wasn't a practice asset. It was mine. And David needed that building to make this sale work. Pacific Northwest Medical Group wouldn't pay $8.2 million for a practice that didn't have a stable location, that would have to find new office space or negotiate a new lease. I pulled out the property deed. My name, clear as the Portland rain. Then I did something I hadn't done in 28 years of practice. I called in sick. At 7:30 the next morning, while David was probably admiring his sculpture over his French press coffee, I was sitting in the office of Catherine Morrison, an attorney who specialized in medical partnership disputes. I brought everything, every document, every contract, every piece of paper with both our signatures. How long before the sale closes? Catherine asked, spreading documents across her conference table with the efficient movements of someone who'd seen this story before. The email said April 15th. That's 3 weeks. She nodded, her pen tapping against her yellow legal pad. Here's the situation. You own 50% of the practice, according to the original partnership agreement. Unless there's been a written modification that you signed and understood, that agreement stands. The fact that he's trying to close a sale without your explicit approval is already problematic. Can he do it? Can he just cut me out like this? Not legally. But Thomas, I need to ask you something critical. In the past 10 years, have you signed any amendments to the partnership? Any documents David presented as routine paperwork? Corporate restructuring papers? Tax documents? Anything that modified the original terms? I thought back. There had been things. Annual corporate filings. New insurance policies, the documents when we brought on the nurse practitioners, the paperwork when we joined the Providence Network. Had I read every page carefully? Had I hired my own attorney to review them? I wanted to say yes, but I respected Catherine too much to lie. I don't know, I admitted. David always said they were standard documents. I trusted him. Catherine's expression told me everything. We need to go through everything. Every signature you've placed on every document for the past 15 years. If he's been planning this and selling a practice for $2 million doesn't happen overnight, then he's laid groundwork. Men like David don't make moves like this without legal cover. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I went to the clinic. I saw patients. I smiled at David in the hallways. I attended staff meetings. I even used the Amazon gift card to buy a book about sailing, just to see if he'd notice my receipt lying around. He didn't. But every evening, I met with Catherine. We reconstructed 28 years of partnership, document by document, every contract, every signature, every decision we'd made about the future of Mitchell and Brennan, and a picture emerged that made my stomach turn. For the past 9 years since 2016, David had been systematically positioning himself as the sole leader of our practice. He'd applied for federal grants in his name alone, describing himself as founder and chief physician. He'd registered continuing medical education programs, listing himself as the practice's sole principal. He'd filed trademark applications for our logo and practice name. I'd thought we owned those jointly, but apparently he'd filed the paperwork himself, paying the fees with practice money, but registering them to David J. Brennan, MD. He'd formed a subsidiary, LLC Brennan Medical Consulting, that held contracts with several of our largest referring hospitals. On paper, Mitchell and Brennan referred patients to specialists through Brennan Medical Consulting. He'd been building a shell structure where he controlled the relationships, and I was just an employee who happened to have an old piece of paper saying I owned half. "This isn't opportunistic," Catherine said during a late-night session in her office, rain drumming against the windows. "This is calculated. He's been planning this for nearly a decade. How did I not see it?" "Because you were being a doctor," she said simply. "You were seeing patients. You were managing the clinic operations. You were doing the actual work of medicine while he was building the architecture of control." On March 31st, David texted me asking to meet for dinner. "Just the two of us," he said, to discuss the transition. We met at Higgins, that upscale restaurant near the Paramount, where David liked to take pharmaceutical reps. Dark wood, white tablecloths, the kind of place where a steak costs $70, and you're paying for the ambiance as much as the food. "Thomas," David said, cutting into a Painted Hills beef ribeye with surgical precision, "I wanted to talk to you about this opportunity Richard mentioned." "The sale," I said flatly, "where you're giving me 12% of my own practice." He paused, knife and fork suspended. "You saw that email. I was CC'd by accident." His jaw tightened, but he recovered smoothly. That was David's gift. He could pivot faster than anyone I'd ever met. "Well, then you know the situation. We have a buyer. Excellent terms. A clean exit for both of us." 12% isn't an exit for me, David. It's theft." He carefully set down his utensils. "Thomas, let's be realistic. Yes, on paper you own 50%. But what have you actually contributed strategically in the past 5 years? I've been the face of this practice. I've built the relationships with Providence, with Legacy, with OHSU. I've brought in the grants, the partnerships. I've positioned us for this sale. You've been, and I mean this with respect, maintaining operations. There's a difference between being a manager and being a leader." The way he said with respect made it clear he had none. "I've managed every aspect of patient care," I said, my voice low. "I've maintained our clinical reputation. I've trained every physician we've brought on. And that's valuable," he interrupted, reaching for his wine. "Don't misunderstand me. Your clinical work has been the foundation. But foundations don't set the vision. They support it. The buyer isn't paying $8.2 million for good patient care. They're paying for market position, for strategic relationships, for growth potential. That's what I've built on my foundation," I wanted to say. "You built your reputation on my shoulders and convinced yourself you were flying." "No," I said instead. "No deal. I don't approve the sale." David smiled, and it wasn't warm. "Thomas, you don't have approval rights anymore. Check the corporate restructuring documents we signed in 2018. Either partner can authorize a sale with 60 days' notice to the other partner. I gave you that notice at the retirement celebration. Effectively, the ceremony was your notification. The gift card was a courtesy. The restructuring documents, the ones he'd presented after we joined the Providence Network, saying they were required by the hospital system to standardize our corporate structure. I'd signed them. I remembered signing them because David had been standing in my office saying we needed them filed by end of business that day, and I had 3 patients waiting. I'll fight it. David finished his wine in one long swallow. With what resources? Legal fees and healthcare disputes run into 6 figures easily. The sale will go through. You'll get your 12%, and that's nearly $1 million, Thomas. That's a generous retirement. Or, he paused, looking at me with something that might have been pity. You can accept it gracefully. Take the money. Finally spend time with Ellen. Maybe travel. You've earned it. Don't make this ugly. I stood up, leaving my untouched salmon on the plate. The ugliness started when you decided I was disposable. I walked out of Higgins while David sat there, probably already calculating how he'd spend my share of our life's work. I called Catherine from my truck in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. He says he has a 2018 corporate restructuring document that gives him unilateral sale authority. Do you remember signing it? Vaguely. But that doesn't mean I didn't sign it. There was a long pause. Rain hammered on the truck's roof. Thomas, I need to tell you something. I pulled property records today for due diligence. The Hawthorne building? Your building? What about it? David filed a quiet title action 3 weeks ago. He's claiming that because the practice has used the building continuously for 22 years and paid rent, the property should be considered a practice asset through equitable interest and continuous operational use. It's a long shot, but if he succeeds, the building becomes part of the sale package. My vision actually blurred for a moment. The building was worth, I'd checked comparable sales just last month, at least $2.8 million in the current Portland market. David was trying to steal that too. Can he win? In Oregon? Maybe. Continuous use arguments are rare, but 22 years is a strong fact pattern. We'd have to fight it, prove that the rental relationship was always arm's length, that the practice never had any ownership expectations. Everything's a fight now, I said quietly, watching rain streak down the windshield. Yes, Catherine agreed. But Thomas, the building is our leverage. Even if his 2018 documents hold up, even if he can push through the sale of the practice itself, he cannot sell what the practice doesn't own. And Pacific Northwest Medical Group won't pay $2 million for a practice that has to immediately relocate or negotiate a new lease. They're buying stability. Without that building, David's deal falls apart. I looked out at the Portland night, at the lights reflecting off wet pavement, at people hurrying through the rain to restaurants and bars and their normal lives. Somewhere in this city, David was probably celebrating, telling himself he'd won. What do? We take away his leverage, Catherine said. And then we show him what happens when you try to erase the person who actually laid the foundation you've been standing on. On April 3rd, I did 4 things. First, I formally rejected the sale in writing to Richard Walsh, copying David. Regardless of what his 2018 documents said, I was on record as opposing any transaction involving Mitchell and Brennan Internal Medicine. Second, I filed a lawsuit in Multnomah County Circuit Court against David and the practice for partnership dissolution, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud. If David wanted out, fine, but we do it properly, with proper valuation, proper asset division, and proper recognition of who built what. Third, I sent notice to Pacific Northwest Medical Group's attorneys, informing them that I, as 50% owner per the original partnership agreement, did not consent to the sale, and that any closing would be void and subject to immediate legal challenge. And fourth, most importantly, I hand-delivered an eviction notice to the practice. As the legal owner of the Hawthorne building, I was terminating the lease effective May 1st, 30 days notice, exactly as the rental agreement specified. Every piece of equipment, every patient file, every examination room had to be cleared out. Pacific Northwest Medical Group was in the middle of their due diligence. They were touring facilities. They were reviewing operational infrastructure. And in 28 days, the flagship location wouldn't exist. David called me at 8:17 that morning. I was sitting in Stumptown Coffee again, same booth, watching my phone light up with his name. I didn't answer. He called again at 8:24. and 8:31, and 8:39. By noon, he'd called 22 times. I finally answered on call number 23. "Thomas, what the hell are you doing?" His voice had lost all its smoothness. It cracked at the edges, raw and desperate. "Terminating a lease. I own the building. The practice rents it. I'm ending that arrangement. You can't do this. The deal will fall through. Pacific Northwest won't buy a practice that doesn't have a location." "Then I guess you have a problem." "Thomas, please, be reasonable." "Reasonable?" I let out a laugh that surprised even me. From a man who tried to steal my life's work for 12%? "Here's reasonable, David. We split everything 50-50, like the original partnership agreement says. You get 4.1 million. I get 4.1 million. We walk away clean." "That's insane. I built this practice's reputation. I brought in the strategic relationships. You stood on my shoulders," I interrupted, "and convinced yourself you were flying. Without my clinical work, my patient care, my operational management, you'd still be charming pharmaceutical reps with nothing to show for it. Every patient you brought in, I kept them. Every relationship you built, I made sure we delivered on our promises. You want to know what you are without me? You're a salesman without product." Silence. I could hear him breathing, calculating. "I'll fight the eviction. I'll fight your lawsuit. With what money? You don't have 1 million lying around. You need this sale to go through, which means you need my building, which means you need me." More silence. Then, "What do you want?" "I want what I always deserved. Equal partnership, equal payout, equal respect. And I want you to send a letter to every member of our staff, explaining that this practice was built by both of us equally, that you misrepresented the history, and that you apologize for trying to erase my contributions. You're destroying 28 years of partnership over ego." "No," I said. "You destroyed it when you decided I was disposable. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." He hung up. Over the next 17 days, David tried everything. He sent lawyers who threatened countersuits. He sent Jennifer Chen, who apologized profusely and said the gift card had been David's idea, that she'd pushed for something better, but he'd insisted on keeping it modest. He even sent Dr. Peterson from radiology, asking if there was any way to work this out before it destroyed the practice entirely. I appreciated their concern, but I didn't budge. The messages started piling up. Texts, emails, voicemails. David's voice getting progressively more desperate with each one. By day 5, he'd sent 18 messages. By day 10, 37. By day 15, 54. I didn't respond to any of them. I just watched the numbers climb like a fever chart. On April 20th, Catherine called me. Pacific Northwest Medical Group pulled out. The deal's dead. Good. David's attorney called me 10 minutes ago. He wants to negotiate a settlement. He's ready to talk. Tell him I'm available tomorrow. April 21st. Spring equinox seems appropriate. Everything balanced. We met at Catherine's office. David looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. The sculpture from his retirement party sat in a box by his feet, apparently. His wife had made him bring it back to the office, and he'd never unpacked it. His lawyer laid out terms. 50-50 split of everything. Practice to be dissolved and assets sold separately. Or we could look for another buyer who understood the partnership situation, and a written acknowledgement that I had been an equal partner from day one, to be sent to all current and former staff. There's one more thing, I said. David looked up, exhausted. The sculpture. The $100,000 piece of art. I want you to auction it and donate the proceeds to the OHSU Medical School Scholarship Fund. In both our names. His jaw clenched. That's petty? No, I said. It's poetic. That sculpture represented what you thought success looked like. Recognition, status, being celebrated while someone else did the work. But the best thing we ever did was train young doctors. So take your trophy and turn it into something that actually matters. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the laugh of a man who just realized how completely he'd lost. You know what, Thomas? Fine. You win. This isn't about winning, I said. It's about acknowledging reality. We built this together. You don't get to rewrite history just because it's convenient. We signed the dissolution papers on May 12th. Mitchell and Brennan Internal Medicine was officially dissolved. Our patient panel was divided among 3 different practices who'd agreed to maintain continuity of care. The medical equipment was sold off. The pharmaceutical contracts were reassigned. The Hawthorne building I kept, and I leased it to 2 new physicians just starting their own practice at rates they could actually afford, the same rates David and I had dreamed of finding 28 years ago. David and I each walked away with our equal shares. $3.9 million after legal fees, taxes, and business dissolution costs. Not the full $4.1 million we'd calculated, but close enough. The day the money hit my account, Ellen and I sat at our kitchen table, the same table we'd bought from a garage sale in 1998, because it was all we could afford, and we just looked at each other. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We do what we should have done years ago," I said. "We live." We bought a small house on the Oregon coast. Nothing extravagant, just a place where you can hear the waves at night and watch the storms roll in from the Pacific. I volunteer at the free clinic in Tillamook 2 days a week, teaching medical students the skills I learned over 40 years of practice. David moved to San Francisco. I heard he started a medical consulting business. I hope he's successful. I genuinely do, because spending energy on anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But sometimes, when I'm having coffee at Stumptown on Division Street, sitting in that same booth where this all started to unravel, I think about that retirement party, about that $40 gift card, about how close I came to letting someone steal not just my money, but my dignity, my history, my sense of worth. And I think about the messages, 63 of them, over those 17 days. Texts, emails, voicemails. David's voice getting more desperate with each one, the professional veneer cracking, then shattering completely. By message 47, he was practically begging. By message 63, he'd stopped making threats and started making promises. But by the time he sent message 63, I'd already made my decision. The partnership was over. The trust was gone. You can't build anything lasting on a foundation of betrayal. So, I didn't respond. I let his words pile up in my inbox like leaves in a gutter. And eventually, after message 63, he stopped trying. That silence, the absence of his voice in my voicemail, the empty space where his desperation used to live, was sweeter than any retirement party, any sculpture, any sum of money could ever be. Because it meant I'd finally reclaimed what he tried to take. Not the money, not the building, but something deeper. The simple knowledge that I had built something real, something that mattered, something that 28 years of revisionist history couldn't erase. And no one could take that truth away. Not even a man I'd once called my brother. The Oregon rain falls steady this May. I watch it from my porch on the coast, coffee in hand, and I think about all those years, the early mornings, the late nights, the sacrifices Ellen and I made so 2 young doctors could chase a dream of practicing medicine the right way. We built something, David and I. That's true, but I was the foundation. And foundations don't forget their weight, their purpose, their worth. And when someone tries to build their empire on your back while pretending you don't exist, that's when you remind them what happens when the foundation walks away. Everything crumbles. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what needed to happen. So something better could be built in its place. Something honest. Something true. Something worth more than all the sculptures in the world.